بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Brothers, sisters and friends, may the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Right, this small little booklet, Embryology in the Quran, a scientific linguistic analysis of chapter 23 with responses to historical, scientific and popular contentions. It has really made people's heads turn, I have to admit. Over 500 comments on Facebook, people talking about it internationally, and people talking about it across the web. Now, I have to make something very clear. Let's not build a straw man. We have not claimed in this booklet that the Quran predates science, or that the Quran actually has detailed, specific statements regarding science. And we have not claimed the Quran is a scientific miracle per se. What we have said is the Islamic theological standpoint that the Quran, once you do a lexical analysis, you break down the lexical items, which are words, and you see the scope of meaning according to the classical dictionaries such as Lisan al-Arab and Lane's lexicon, which is an academic dictionary actually, and you correspond these with modern science, the Quran will be accurate. So we say the Quran does not negate established fact or reality. And all the statements from commentators and atheist apologists, etc., they state, it's not a miracle, how could this be a miracle? Now, we're actually not claiming this now. We're saying the theological view in Islam is that the Quran doesn't negate established reality. Now, you can't use classical exegesis to substantiate your claim, to say that it's not scientific or that it goes against reality. Why? Because classical exegesis, not from a creedal perspective, but with regards to things about natural phenomena, are contingent on the science at the time. They are contingent on the science at the time. So when people quote, for example, Ibn Kathir, Jalalain, Qurtubi, Tabari, Ibn Abbas and many others, their understanding of science was a popularized Greek understanding, for example. So they would squeeze what they thought was scientific fact onto the Quran. However, we need to be a bit more balanced and not develop a straw man. What we need to do is do a lexical analysis. And this is what this booklet has done. It has taken each word and seen in the classical dictionaries like Lisan al-Arab and the academic dictionaries like Lane's lexicon, and seen the scope of meaning, and do these meanings correspond with modern embryology? And we see that they do. Now, they may be ambiguous and they may be specific, but that's not the case. The point is, does the Quran negate reality or not? And if you read this booklet, which you can download from the iERA website, www.iera.org.uk, when you download it and read it, you see that there is a correspondence. Now, some people say, well, this is linguistic gymnastics. You have done reinterpretations. Well, there's 2 points here. First and foremost, why is your interpretation correct? Just because you want to link it to Greek medicine? Now, we're not saying our interpretation is the only interpretation, but we say, look, when we have a balanced approach and we see the lexical items and the scope of meaning, it corresponds with modern embryology, which we have used like the works of John Allen and Beverly Kramer and Ram Sharma, which are well-known modern embryologists. Now, we're going to do a series of videos on this, popularizing some of the really ridiculous contentions from the atheist apologists and commentators. But one point I want to talk about today is Professor P.Z. Myers. Many of you may know that Professor P.Z. Myers was actually in discussion with us at the Atheist Convention in Ireland this year. And myself and my colleague Adnan Rashid, we had a discussion with him about the existence of God and about the Quran itself. And P.Z. Myers, he claims to be a biologist, which I think he is. He's an academic, and he claims to be an embryologist. He wanted to undermine the Quran because we were wrong. We said, for example, the Quran talks about the formation of bones, then the formation of muscle, which is not true, because the Quran talks about the formation of bones, which in Arabic is idham, but also talks about when the muscle or the flesh actually surrounds and develops around the bones, not when the muscles are actually being developed themselves or being created. Because the wording is fakasona, not falakhalaqna, fakasona. So not and then we created, but rather and then we clothed. So we actually said something that was inaccurate. But even so, I just want to highlight some of the desperate attempts from even atheist apologist academics like Professor P.Z. Myers, he was basically saying, oh, the Quran is wrong then, if it talks about bones forming first and then muscle, because they actually happen at the same time. And this is what he had to say. He said, you have differentiation of mesoderm, then within the mesoderm you have segregation into things like embryonic mesenchyme, and then you have the cartilaginous centers to form bone, and these are forming simultaneously. That is, and he meant the muscle with the bones are forming simultaneously. But he was wrong. P.Z. Myers was wrong, and a lot of atheist apologists are using him as a reference point. But if we go to basic, standard medical textbooks on embryology, you see that this is wrong. For instance, we know, according to embryologists John Allen and Beverly Kramer, they state the following, and they say in their book The Fundamentals of Human Embryology, the second edition, published by Wits University Press, page 148, soon, and I repeat, soon after the cartilaginous models of the bones have been established, the myogenic cells, which have now become myoblasts, aggregate to form muscle masses on the ventral and dorsal aspects of the limbs. So what John Allen and Beverly Kramer are saying is that no, you have bones, then you have muscle. P.Z. Myers got it wrong. Also, the process of muscular formation is not just limited to the limbs. Once the skeletal framework is in place, muscles start to form around the developing skeleton. For example, embryologist Bruce Coulson highlights how the facial muscle forms once the basic facial skeletal structure takes place. And this can be found in Human Embryology and Developmental Biology, the 4th edition, page 333. So we see the desperate attempts by even academic atheist professors to undermine religious claims. Now, I have to admit that many of the Muslim claims saying that the Quran predates science is a wrong claim, because the Quran is primarily a linguistic book. It's a unique linguistic genre, and this unique literary form is expressed in an eloquent style, which basically means it has to be concise, and its concise nature sometimes can be ambiguous, and we agree. However, its ambiguity is not infinite. There is a scope of interpretation. So, for example, take the word nutfa that the Quran uses. We know it could mean a dribble. It could mean a single entity from the mother and the father. We know it could mean a mixed substance. And we know it could mean various other things. So the point here is, once we see the multi-layered meaning of a single word, which is 8 to 9 meanings, 5 to 10 meanings, we look at them and do they correspond with modern embryology? And when you read this paper, you see that they do. That's why it's very interesting that currently the commentators have said nothing about the inaccuracy of the Quran once you do an accurate lexical analysis. But they still claim that the Quran still could have copied Aristotle or Galen, and they say, look, Quran says this, therefore it's in line with Galen because Galen said exactly the same things. But we're going to have a video on that very soon. But I want to highlight another point. And the other point is that we need to have a very nuanced discussion on these issues. Because take the scholar Muhar Ali, he says the Quran is not contingent on a 7th century worldview. Rather, it's timeless from that perspective, and the things that it says about natural phenomena or established fact are actually in line with reality. So the Quran's lexical items are in line with reality as per this paper. But the final thing I wanted to say was, there are huge desperate attempts to practically link the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace, with the Greek works like Aristotle and Galen. In this paper, the plagiarization thesis has been dismantled because the practical links are only two: popularized culture at the time in 7th century Arabia, and Al-Harith bin Kalada, which was a so-called physician at the time. They have both been dismantled because Al-Harith bin Kalada was actually somebody who didn't have the medical techniques of the Greeks at the time and did not represent Greek medicine, and we have shown this in detail to see the paper. But finally, if you go to the works of Plino Puresci in his book A History of Medicine, you will see that the popularized culture was not that of Greek medicine. Anyway, we'll talk about this much later. Assalamu alaikum.